So I didn't realize I was muted. I'm having a great day today. Hi everybody, it's Christy. Had to fix my hair a little bit because I was looking a little rough today. As you notice, I'm like in workout gear. I don't care. So I wasn't able to do Talk It Out Tuesday yesterday. I do feel really bad about that, but the day got away from me and I'm not going to make myself feel guilty for it. So moving on, today's topic is about speaking up. When to speak up, how to speak up, what to do after, and the impact of silence, most importantly. So, when it comes to, that scared me. When it comes to speaking up, there's a couple quotes that I want to put in here that I'm going to read to you guys. One is from Germany Ken, and that is, to say nothing is to say something. You must denounce things that you are against, or one might believe that you support things you do not. If you don't support something, make sure you make it clear that you don't support it if you're in a room with people who do. Otherwise, it's going to be automatically assumed that you do, and that is not what we want. So, fun fact. Also, we who have means and a voice must use them to help people who have neither, from Jennifer Donnelly. It's important to speak up for people who can't. Speaking up is when you communicate properly, assertively, and honestly for the rights and needs of yourself, but also for others. It's the root of all social change, including within organizations like your work or your family, whatever the case may be. You need to communicate. So, for many of us, it's easier to advocate for others than it is to advocate for ourselves, but it is really important to know when and how to speak up and how to do it effectively. A lot of the times, our message is lost in our mess. Write that down. Our message is lost in our mess, and that's kind of something we want to avoid here. So make sure you're affecting, you are affecting, but make sure you're communicating effectively. When we don't speak up for others, we erode our sense of self-worth, and we become gauged in a cycle of rationalizing behavior that kind of takes us away from our values. And it looks where do I want to go with this? Because my brain is fried, people. I did this on Instagram at 1:00, and now I'm like, I should have just posted that video, but I wanted to make sure I got the chance to go live in case anybody wanted to jump in. This is an open forum, by the way. If anybody wants the link, just let me know and I'll send it. When it comes to speaking up, and all of my notes are jumbled, of course. I'm going to pull that up real quick because I don't know why I didn't just keep it up. I closed it out. Like I said, I'm having a day. I'll go into the silence last, but let's get into the first part, which is when to speak up. How do you know when to speak up and when not to speak up? Because I know that is a struggle for a lot of people. A lot of the times before talking about what we can do to even speak up or where to start, we might want to hear the buts or justifications for why we don't speak up. And here's a few of them. Here's a few things that we tell ourselves, and you can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. It doesn't make any difference, or I'll get in trouble, or no one will listen. It's easier not to say anything. If I do, I already know what's going to happen. I don't want to cause any waves. It's not really my place, or they won't like me. Those are some of the reasons that we tell ourselves. But in honesty, that is just anxiety or past experience or trauma talking to us. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we should not speak up. So make sure you go through your head and you really sit and think about whether or not you need to speak up. An important thing to remember when it comes to speaking up, not just for yourself, but for others, you need to first know what you are and what you are not willing to tolerate. So you really got to know yourself in order to do that. It would help if I could speak English today. In order to know what you like and what you don't like, you kind of got to sit and figure that out for yourself. Make sure you do that. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes in the background. My computer is literally moving like a turtle today. Disrespectful. But our negative experiences that we have in the past don't necessarily reflect the current situation that we're in. And that's a lot of trouble that we have when it comes to speaking up about things that really bother us or things that concern us. When to speak up. So let me first, again, I said know when to tolerate. I'm still trying to pull this up in the background. Where the hell is it? This is just disrespectful today. Sorry, bear with me 1 second, guys. Where the hell are my notes? Duh. Right in front of my face. I'm having a great time here. Sorry, I should have had this pulled up initially, and I usually do. but I was kind of rushing through because I didn't want to do this 7 o'clock at night. I've got other things to do. Today, Wednesdays are not a good day for me to do these, but again, I wanted to make sure that I did that for you guys because I did not do it yesterday. So, when to know when to say something. Number one, when it's making a suggestion for improvement, or when it's to disagree with a course of action, or addressing frustration either with a coworker or family member. Usually, like I said, we avoid the situation because we don't want to cause any waves, but that's not really fair to ourselves, and that's not really holding tight to our boundaries. Something to acknowledge is something called cognitive dissonance, and that's a psychological term for the mental distress that arises when you're trying to balance two conflicting thoughts, feelings, or values. That's the feeling we associate with when we want to say something, but we can't or we won't for whatever reason. So, important term, write that down, cognitive dissonance. And I'm so proud of myself because I messed up saying that twice earlier. So, go fact for me. Imagine the possibilities and the outcomes before you speak up. That's important to know too, because you want to know, am I doing this out of an emotion that I'm currently feeling? Because remember that emotions are temporary. We should never base a conversation based on our current emotions. Always take the time to sit back, recenter yourself so that you know when to speak up or why you're speaking up, or if it's just you kind of throwing a fit because you're upset. Again, you don't want your message to get lost in your mess. Sorry, my 10-year-old came in. Ask yourself some questions. So before you even speak up, again, imagine the possibilities and your outcomes, and assume everyone is ignorant, and assume you are too. We have to be teachable because we're not always right. So ask yourself some questions like, what are the reasons for not speaking up? What is the impact of not doing so? What are some positive outcomes that could come from speaking up? When speaking up, what outcome would you like to see? How can you share that outcome with others? What would it take for a situation to be painful enough for you to speak up? And how can you hold yourself accountable for keeping it from getting to that point? So, some reasons, again, we don't speak up: childhood experience, social impacts, past trauma, gender differences, fear of retaliation, and concern for what others think, which bothers me the most because, as anybody knows me, knows that I do not care. So, when to speak up is when someone is upset or you are, just remembering to keep in mind that you don't want to let your emotions take over. Make sure that you take a minute to recenter yourself and really consider your thoughts before you speak up. Next is when it sets a dangerous precedent. If someone you know or you are in immediate danger, you need to speak up and you need to say something. Next is when you have the upper hand. So when you have the ability to, when no one else will. And also to give a voice to your inner self. So if you're in a leadership position, that's your job to speak up for the people who are not in a leadership position. But I'll get into the impact of silence more about that, about the leadership position. So hold that thought. Next is how to speak up. Communicating effectively is a major, major issue that we have. So number one is to create a trigger phrase for yourself. We often try to manage not speaking up by kind of forcing that feeling down when we feel uncomfortable. Instead, create a phrase that leads you towards speaking up, but doesn't kind of dip out of doing so. What I mean by that is using I statements, like, I have a question about that, or I'm uncomfortable with, or from my perspective, because y'all know that's my favorite word, from my perspective, you said, or I'm not sure I'm understanding. Is this what you said? Using I statements makes it personal, doesn't feel like a personal attack, and it's an effective way to communicate when somebody rubs you the wrong way. Also, know your rights. Don't over-explain. When you over-explain, it takes away your credibility because your message gets lost in your mess. Be very clear what you're trying to express. And remember, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Check the volume of your voice, the verbiage that you're using, and remember to use those I statements. Very, very important. And also be compassionate. Remember to look at things from other people's point of view and perspective when you're speaking up, especially if it's for someone else. And keep in mind that when you're speaking up for someone else, you should always ask their consent first. No one wants to have somebody speak for them if it's not something that they actually feel. There's no worse thing that you could do in the world than speak up for someone and you're wrong about how they're feeling or the situation entirely. So next is after speaking up. Sit and ask yourself how you feel after speaking up. A lot of us go back on past experiences and go, not my best work. Write down why. Write down the positive parts that worked for your conversation when you spoke up, and also write down the negatives so that you can learn and you can grow from that. Because that was the point for all of us to grow. No one is ever perfect in their first communication ever. I know for every first person I've ever met, they probably didn't like me till the second or third time because I'm pretty aggressive. But when it comes to speaking up, you want to make sure that you were clear about what you wanted. You were clear about your hurt, and you were clear about your I statements. I feel, I think, I know, I am, I will not allow, because it makes it personal and it makes it reflective of you. When you're done, there is a little bit of a period where you will be irritable after speaking up. It's because of our minds. We kind of make ourselves feel guilty for speaking up. It's something that's ingrained to us. So make sure you take some time for you after speaking up, even if it is for you or for someone else, because you will probably feel irritable after. Just as a heads up, take that time alone to recenter and write it out. My favorite line, write it out. When you're done speaking up for yourself or for someone else and you want to go over everything, writing things down and looking at it from a different perspective gives us a chance to kind of clarify how we're feeling, what we're feeling, and what is going on. And it helps us look at things from a different perspective. So, important fact to know. The next thing I want to go into, and it's kind of the last thing, and I know I'm flying through this, but like I said, this was supposed to be yesterday, so I just wanted to make sure I get this episode out to you guys. There is an impact when you're silent, and it is very important to know. And Leonardo da Vinci has a quote that said, "Nothing strengthens authority so much as silence." Sometimes you don't need to speak up on things. Not everything needs a response, especially when it comes to negative things. Being silent allows us to channel our energies. It gives us the clarity that we need to calmly face challenges and uncertainty and wet sock energy people, as I like to call it. You can practice in the morning by being silent, just kind of feeling how you're feeling in the morning, which is usually miserable if you're anything like me. But here are 6 steps and 6 things that come from being silent. 6 things, 6 powers from being silent. Number 1, it builds trust. If you want to develop effective communication or relationships, you need to build trust. And in order to do that, you got to listen. Listening does not mean that you're hearing for a response. There's a big difference between hearing things and listening. Make sure you're not listening to respond. You're listening to understand. Important. Number 2, to emphasize a point. If you use too many words, you kind of water down and lose your message. Use fewer words because it matters. It does. Again, your message can get lost in your mess. When you're using too much verbiage and you're throwing 5 paragraphs in a row at somebody, the message was lost somewhere in the second one because you just kept going. Water it down. If you have to rewrite a rough draft 6 times like I do before you send a long message expressing your hurt, do so. Or just don't send it at all. I'll get into that in a minute. Number 3, for negotiations, a very powerful tool to stay silent. When you're negotiating, silence is very intimidating and it is very nerve-wracking. So make sure you stay silent because most people will stumble over their words and you'll end up getting the good end of the stick on that one. Let them wonder what you're thinking. It's like poker. Next is to empower others. When you speak up, it empowers others because it gives them the courage to do the same. But when you're silent, it gives them a chance to do it for themselves. It helps you gain respect, increases your power, and lets you empower others. That's what leaders do. We want to lead and give others the opportunity to lead as well. Next, the sooner you become silent is the sooner you get your answer. When you get your answer, most people ask a question and we don't stop for an answer, or we'll throw out speaking up about our hurt or about something that bothers us and we'll just keep going. We don't even give anybody a chance to respond. And that's the problem. You're not giving them a chance to respond. Sometimes we stumble over hurt when really it was just a miscommunication. So that's two things. Number one, it's a good reason to speak up for that reason. You get clarification. But number two, you kind of stumbled over your words and you kind of lost your message in your mess. And now something that should have been very small is now a very big thing. And we'll get into that too. To 6, silence is good to recenter yourself. I always say to take time out of your day to be silent and take time right after something that bothers you happens to recenter. Take that time to be silent. Write it down if you have to. Go over your thoughts. Pencil it out. Because sometimes it's just our perspective in that moment because of our emotions. And you don't want to let your emotions run when you speak up about something. Especially when it comes to family, when it comes to friends, when it comes to your job, when to speak up. Again, when it comes to your job, especially in my opinion, make sure it's appropriate for you to speak up. Don't act out of your pay range, people, okay? It's different between speaking up to show that you have leadership capabilities or skill. It's another to speak up just to rat people out for things you're doing at work. Stay in your lane, Karen, okay? Not everything needs to be talked about. Not everything needs to be spoken about. So it's knowing when to stay silent and knowing when to speak up is very important. Definitely want to mention, honorable mention here, because I am almost done. I'm wrapping up. Make sure you're paying attention to your cognitive dissonance. Make sure you know that you're having a struggle balancing 2 or more conflicting thoughts, feelings, or values. That is when you want to speak up. It's that gut feeling we have, like that bothers me. Does it bother you emotionally, or does it come for your values? Does it come after your thoughts? More than just your emotions. Your thoughts, feelings, or values are very different from your emotions. Make sure, and I always say this, if you want to speak up for yourself or for someone else, you write it out first. By writing it out, you give yourself the chance to not only make sure your message isn't getting lost in your mess, but that you looked at it from every perspective and you looked at it in a compassionate eye instead of an emotional one. So, I know with mental health, that's the biggest struggle is speaking up, but it is important too, because then you can recognize that you are not alone in how you're feeling and what you're going through. Other people are going through the same. I learned that lesson myself this year. So don't learn the lesson the way I did. Speak up when you're feeling off, when you're feeling upset, when you're feeling down to your friends, but make sure you ask your friends before you speak up for them. It's not okay to just speak up for somebody on their behalf without asking first. You want to make sure you have their permission, and you also want to make sure you have the right idea. We do things out of good intentions, but that does not always mean that we are right. So with that being said, that's really all I had for speaking up and the impact of silence. Hope you guys learned something today. I will see you next week. Our topic is addiction. And make sure you tune in on Friday at 7 o'clock to see our interview with Timothy Lodgen. It's going to be a great one. He's got a really powerful story, so I'm excited to present it to you guys. And I will see you next Tuesday. Not intentionally, like, see you next Tuesday. You got it. I had to throw a joke in. Sorry. See ya.